Hi everyone, and most welcome to this webinar on generative AI and our invited guest Tatic Designstudio from Milan. My name is Martina Eriksdotter. I work here at AI Sweden as a strategic lead for the creative sector. And this webinar is possible to arrange thanks to our project Recreate that we kicked off just before summer. The project will be running for 2 years and it's financed by Västra Götalandsregionen, Tillväxtverket, and also throughout the partnership that is working in the project. We are focusing mainly on four areas, which is film, design, architecture, and fashion. If you want to know more about our work, please visit our website, where you can also fill in a form for our newsletter, where we will be sharing information, inspiration, and other kinds of knowledge sharing when it comes to these four areas and AI. Today we are inviting, in Andrea Nordvall, that also is a project member for Recreate, together with Dante Zilliacus from Tatic Designstudio. And Andrea will start off with giving a lecture about generative AI, and then Dante will follow with giving some insights on how they have been implementing the new technology in their workflow, share some learnings from it, and also what they look into ahead. Finally, we will open up for a Q&A for you as an audience to participate, and you are most welcome to ask your questions in the chat function in this webinar from now if you want to, and we will do our very best to answer all the questions we have time for in this webinar. And if there are some questions left, or if you want to reach out and have a dialogue with us, go to the website and contact us through the contact information you can find there. I think that was all I wanted to say. Andrea, I wonder if you are ready.
For sure. Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you. The screen is yours.
Yes, thank you. And first of all, I'm very glad to see so many here on this seminar on this Friday lunch. Very encouraging. And this is, of course, one of the many seminars that will happen during this project. So let's start. So for today, I want to talk a bit about generative AI in relation to design processes in creative sectors. And when I talk about design processes here, it could also be a more open-ended creative process, but for the sake of clarity, I would say design process. And some things about me, my background. I'm currently a PhD candidate in visualization, XR, and virtual production at the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the Blekinge Institute of Technology, which is situated in Karlskrona, Sweden. I teach at university and I do research. And for teaching, I teach generative AI, and I've done so since, 2020, when we started courses in media generation for visual production. I teach virtual production and I teach media technology thesis work. And I have a background in media technology and in informatics and HCI, focusing on human AI interaction. And I've did a master thesis on generative AI for visual concept development for creative industry, where I've developed tools for that sector. Since we're talking creative industry, I should also say that I have a background as a guest lecturer in other universities. Some of them are art-based. And before that, background as an artist and media producer with many different institutions. And here you see images of my normal working environment at the virtual production studio lab in Karlskrona, where I work with visualization experiments and assisting in film production. The part of informatics that I've been particularly interested in is human-centered AI, And that is an approach within human-computer interaction that prioritizes human needs in developing and implementing AI models for practical use. And this is similar to user-centered design, if you're familiar with that. So here the idea is not to just, put out the technology there and see if it works, but rather to do careful and thoughtful implementation. And I think this is something that we can use for in this project, and also going forward in discussions regarding generative AI for creative sectors. To start then, what is generative AI, and what's the difference between generative AI and other AI systems? I'm kind of fond of these definitions. There are many definitions of both AI and generative AI. But this definition, where generative AI is described as an AI system that aims to produce information similar to what it has been trained on, is generally a good description. Another property of generative AI that might not be obvious, but you all have encountered, is that output is variable. So the same input might not produce the exact same output. You can set up these systems to be very deterministic, but usually you set up a system or a service with a generative AI model that does variable output. You want different outputs every time. And this, of course, enable creative use in a sense. So here we see an example of a very typical generative AI model, an image generator that generates images based on text input, or prompt, as it has become popular to say. I prefer to say text input for some reason. And this would be called a text-to-image model. And you can put generative AI in opposition to other types of AI which are not generative. And one example of that is AI that is discriminative. And that is an AI system that makes a decision or classification or identification based on data input. And this data input could be like abstract data, or it could be, as in this case you see on screen, like a video input. So here, a discriminative AI model that does object detection detects that I am present in the image and that I'm holding a cup. And it discriminates between different types of categories and tries to come up with a specific decision. And these types of systems, you don't usually want to be variable. You want them to definitely give the right answer and the best answer when doing evaluation, whereas generative AI, usually you want variable outputs. And generative AI is usually described with different modalities in mind. So if you have a generative model and you give it some kind of input and expect an output, we usually describe this by the type of media artifacts that are produced by the model. So we can talk about an image generation model, or a video generation model, or a text generation model, also commonly known as a large language model. And these media modalities that can be inputs or outputs are anything that could be digitized. So it could be text, could be image, could be video, could be audio, could be mesh, could be point cloud. And of course, we see new media formats that are digital that are added to this list all the time. So a typical model modality input-output pair would be text to image, or text to video, or text to text, as is in the case with large language models, or image to image, or image to video, etc., etc. So this is a way to describe what kind of input and what kind of output you can expect from a particular model. And something that has become very common now is multimodal models that can accept multiple media modalities as input or output, or that you chain models together, so that, for instance, you have a language model that takes text input and can provide text output. But this language model can also launch a secondary image generation model. So For instance, in GPT, you can ask the model to generate an image. And this can be done by chaining models together, effectively achieving multimodality. There are also models that are natively multimodal also, but this can be a bit confusing. But I think this way of describing input and output is quite useful. And I also say this because many people who are introduced to AI through the use of commercial web services often come under the impression that text is the only input, whereas you can have any kind of data as input. But of course, text is a very available input, and I assume easy to train on also. But for many creative sector users, I would argue that image input is perhaps the most important one. And as I said, these models are usually variable in output, and that means that each time you run inference, you will get different results, and this is expected and by design in a generative model. You can set it up so that it only will give one specific output given certain input conditions, but normally you want different outputs every time, and this should be multiple and this should be divergent. And also these outputs should be similar to, but not identical to, examples present in training data. And this could happen if a generative model is overtrained. So it's trained so much so it just replicates what's in the training data exactly, or certain results from it. That's a problem that can happen. But usually you want models that are giving similar outputs to training data, but something we haven't seen before. And of course, a model that makes some kind of decision, a discriminative model, we want it to make the right decision. So we only want one output. And I say this because this variable output property of generative models has implications for design processes. So if we imagine that we have a design process or a creative process, and I've illustrated this with these dots that are connected by a line. And this design process is moving forward from perhaps early ideation to conceptualization to early visualization, etc., etc. We all know a bit about how design processes usually work. You go from something very open-ended, and then you narrow into more definite design in iterations. It's the usual structure. And something that I see being discussed and tested a lot right now is the use of generative models in design processes. So here we see an example of a generative model that is given an input, and it gives variable outputs. And these outputs are used in the design process, maybe as a source for ideas, maybe as visualization based on previous steps in this design process. But even though the model can generate many different outputs, only a few of them is considered desired results in design process. And this would be results that are actually useful for going on with the design process. Could be something that visualizes a design successfully, contributes with an idea, etc. There could also be outputs that are not useful for this design process, that are irrelevant, etc., etc. And what we ideally want in a design process from a generative model is something that we know we want, but don't know specifically. This is what we're searching for in our design process or creative process. And there's a very fine term by Nelson Stolteman in the book Design Way, where they call it the expected unexpected. So we expect what we want, but we get surprised when we find it by coming up with an idea ourselves, or in this case, maybe by using a generative model. So what can happen when we use a generative model in a design process like this? I could say that results, regardless of which design phase we're talking about, the outcome could be that the model gives a desirable result. And in this case, that would contribute to the design process. And in this case, this is usually a useful media artifact for the design process. And when this happens, it's all good. We could also imagine that an outcome is undesirable, and the model gives irrelevant results, results of low quality, or something that for any reason doesn't contribute to the design process. We can also imagine a situation where models actually come up with harmful outcome, and that would be a mod that produces uh, potentially traumatizing media content, illegal content, photosensitive content like flashing video that could injure people, or content contributing to society stereotypes that are being spread, etc. So it's possible for mods to come up with harmful outcomes. I would also like to argue that undesirable outputs are harmful in design because every design process is limited in scope, they're limited in time, and they're limited in resources, meaning that undesirable results that you have to iterate on using a generative AI model, they consume resources. They consume human resources in the design process, and they also consume compute resources. And this is actually also a harmful outcome. So this should ideally say desirable, somewhat harmful, and harmful. And of course, the limitations of these categories are very contextual. They're very dependent on user needs. They're dependent on the design process, the design situation, and other stakeholders. And for illustration here, I have two images, one with a biased outcome from an image generator, and another example with data absence, where I tried to generate something that wasn't present in training data. There are two issues with this property of generative models being generative in the design process that has been discussed. And one problem is output complexity. And I'm sure you will recognize both of these when I talk about them. And output complexity means that users often have difficulties mapping complex outputs that they get from the generative model with the possible inputs. So the arrow on the top here, how do I get the specific output? How can I make the model give me what I want, what I desire in the design process, is the top arrow there. And this is a problem with output complexity. You don't understand what you need to do to get the generative model to give outputs that are relevant for your design process. Another related problem is capability uncertainty. That means that users are uncertain of what the system can do. This will, of course, change over time when people become more familiar with specific systems. But as these systems are complex and give complex results, it can be very hard to understand what outputs are even possible from a certain model. And I think one way to address this is to create models and services that are more specialized. This is, of course, especially a problem with generalized models that can generate like any image, any video, any text. They are so open-ended that it can be very hard for users to understand what this can be generated with them. And I consider this a form of usability problem. These are, of course, related to the contextual needs you have in a design process. So if you manage to solve this problem by giving different inputs to the generative model or setting up a workflow that gives more of the desired results you want in a design process, that's all good for you. but it might not be so that these results is transferable to other design processes that you do if they're different. And design processes tend to be quite different from each other and different needs. And this means that it is a kind of an ongoing problem to get generative models to provide the desired results in design processes. And finally, I want to say a bit about automation and assistive generative AI use. And because there's a lot of discussion right now about the automation of generative models for creative tasks, for design processes, etc., in creative sectors right now. And I must say that I don't expect automation to be widespread, and I will try to explain why. And the reason is that if you want to set up an AI service or generative AI service that automates a creative task, you assume that the model will always give the desired results that are needed by the design process, and preferably also run the whole design process from understanding the design situation to coming up with design alternatives, evaluating these alternatives, and also perhaps also producing a final design. And perhaps you could discussing certain parts of these steps, but in any case, you're assuming that the model will always produce desired results. And while you can fine-tune a model to give certain results or set up a workflow that gives certain results over and over, this would assume that your creative process is standardized. And most of these processes, design processes and creative processes, are not standardized. And to me, that indicates that it's not practical to imagine automation happen, especially as the understanding of what is a desired result in a design process or creative process requires deep domain knowledge from the creative sector. So this is something also that a model like this can't figure out. But that said, you can imagine situations where generative models are set up to, for instance, mass produce content, mass publish content in social media in the hope of that some of this content will be the quote unquote desired results for social media. And that might be something that go viral, for instance. So in that case, for sure, but for attaining quality in creative sector, I have a very hard time seeing automation being done unless you use a generative model to generate very predictable results that should be predictable each time. And one example of this would be the use of image upscalers, which are generative models, so that you go from low resolution in an image to high resolution. This is a generative process, but it's not very creative. So you expect very consistent results. And in this case, I can see an automation step with upscaling being set up. But in more open-ended design process and creative process use, I have a very hard time seeing automation happen like this. That said, assisted use in different parts of the design process where you fine-tune your workflow with a generative model to get it to generate certain desired results, that could happen if you want to do that in your creative work. So finally, I just want to summarize and say that I think that this property of generative variability, that generative models generate different results each time, it's both a possibility and a limitation for the use of generative AI models in design processes and creative processes, because it will mean that they will give results that are not relevant to you. And I don't see how this can be fundamentally solved, as this is what the model are designed for to do. So I anticipate that there will be a huge interest in and need for competences in fine-tuning models or setting up workflows where you can get a generative AI model to give you those desired results. And I think our next speaker today will talk a bit about this and the dynamics that can happen around this. And from a research perspective, this likely needs coordination between computer science and people who study interaction with AI models. Okay, thank you. That's it for me. If there are any questions, we need to have them after the next speaker. So I will end my presentation here and say thank you.
Well, thank you, Andrea. We are so happy that you are with us in this project, and thank you for this short and brief lecture about generative AI. I don't think we should wait anymore. I think we just move on to invite Dante Zilliacus from Tatic Designstudio and let him explain how they have been implemented this new technique in their workflows and some learnings, as I said, and also what they look ahead to in the future. Dante, the screen is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. So yeah, great pleasure to be here with all of you and pay some attention to this very interesting and exciting topic. And yeah, I will share now a bit of our story to all of you. So, wait, no, there we go. All right, okay. So, hi everybody. My name is Dante Zilliacus. I'm born and raised in Sweden, in the countryside outside of Gothenburg. And in my life, I've always had quite a huge interest and curiosity for technology. And I've been dabbling around with this since my early days. I built my first computer when I was 13 years old, and I always wanted to figure out how things work and took them apart and yada, yada. It's a traditional story about a designer. I decided to pursue this also creative passion of mine and went to Lund, where I studied my bachelor's in industrial design. And I nowadays work as a senior designer at Tatic Designstudio, where I've been working for the last 5 years. So, Tatic Designstudio, we're a turnkey design studio for consumer products, consisting of an international team of experienced and award-winning product design, brand, and innovation specialists. And we are located in Europe's design capital, Milano, in Italy. We are working with making products communicate and talk to the user or the consumer through their design. We design product ranges for strong brand and market contexts. And in essence, we create products that are desired and create or evoke emotion in people. So we don't have a lot of time to go into exactly who we are and what we do, but some of our core competencies that we work with here that our clients also come to us for is brand strategic design. Basically, we seldom work with developing just a single product. We usually develop whole families and ranges. And through this experience, we've also accumulated quite a lot of knowledge in visual brand language and brand identity. So for several clients, we've also developed these design guidelines, like you see here for Gardena, which we have developed over 350 products for, based on the design language that we have developed for them. We are also working very user-centric in our design process, integrating consumer insights and human, let's say, behavior and doing research with both users, but also sellers and product experts to find, let's say, new areas of innovation or find things that just never work with the product and nobody has addressed yet. So this is a very important thing for us to make sure that we stay connected with our end user. We also have a lot of experience in ergonomic design. We come from a lot of experience in the sporting and power tool industry, where ergonomy and safety are at high value. So we have, through the years, gained quite a lot of competence in this field, and this is one of the things that a lot of our clients are coming to us for. A factor that has become something we actually cherish and that drives and motivates us quite a lot is the design to cost factor. So in the product development of any product, the cost is a huge one, and it's often, I think, overlooked in the romanticizing of design. But it's actually something that we find quite thrilling to work with, because it gives space for creativity, creative solutions, and working a lot not only towards the user or the client, but also with the manufacturing and, let's say, the technology that makes a product come to life. And lastly, the passion that really is driving us in our profession as designers is the form factor. So making products speak to you. And we have been tested on this capacity through the most difficult projects that we have been commissioned to design through the years, everything from industrial respirators, protective sports equipments, all the way up to performance sailing yachts. So a bit short about our process. So the creative process at a large is similar between many fields, but just to kind of show a bit of a tangent of what I will be talking about here today, I'm just going to give you a quick swoop without going too deep into it of the things that we work with here. So first step of any design development process or product development process is what our clients call the concept writing stage. This is essentially, it's a bit of a pre-stage where a product is, or a potential product is evaluated based on screenings and interviews, if it has a potential on the market. And we are part of these screenings by illustrating, in this case, a product for Bosch, a pruning chainsaw. We are illustrating the frustrations and the product benefits that would come from the introduction of this product. So this is in the form of 2D illustration sketches that we are supplying to our clients. Then we're stepping into what we call kind of the core design activity, and that's the design ideation phase. So this is where we take technical components like motors or batteries and electrical components, things like this, and we arrange them differently to make sure we achieve the best-in-class ergonomy. Here also a big part is identifying what the superiority claim of the product is. If this product is meant to be the most powerful in class or the lightest in class, then it's important that we visually represent that within the design. And of course, we're working with creating a general appeal and applying the brand identity onto the product. Next step, this step, design ideation is all done by us in 2D by sketching. So it's a manual sketching exercise to communicate all of these ideas. Into the next step of the design development phase, we're going into 3D, so CAD modeling, where things like the product ergonomics are being fine-tuned. We're working here more with the feasibility of manufacturing and making sure that everything is sturdy and strong enough and meets all the regulations. And of course, we're staying within the scope of cost for the project. Next step, and often quite overlooked, is the engineering collab step, what we call it. This is where the design has essentially been settled for and passed on to the manufacturer. And in this stage, the manufacturer is working a lot with adding all the structural and integrity internal components. And in this stage, also kind of fulfilling drop testing requirements and all this kind of compliance things. And in this stage, it is quite common in any design process that this initial design idea kind of gets killed because you have all these reality checks that drives the result away from the design idea. So we find this very important, this step, and it's a step that we are quite insistent on with our clients, that we are staying with them in. So this means we're working a lot with the manufacturer to optimize the feasibility together with the design and kind of finalize things in a way where we're following the process all the way through. Final step is market introduction. So here we supply with prototypes for photography. We make renderings for marketing material and animations and things like this. So in a nutshell, that's our previous design process. So we are, sorry, I have a double slide here. So going into what I think everyone is here for is the AI journey that we've had. And I'd like to share with you a bit of the story where we started and where we are today. So to follow all of that, I would like to introduce you here to the Gartner hype cycle. So this is a cycle, or it's basically a visual graph showing how technology is usually implemented at the large scale in society or by users or anything. So we can take just, let's say, CAD modeling as an example. Back in the, about 40, 50 years ago, we had a new technology that was introduced, and suddenly people kind of started talking about it. They had all these big ideas about, oh, we don't have to do any, hand drawing things anymore. And if before you were drawing the section views of products, and you had to do everything by hand. And when there was a little small change, you had to do things all over. And now with CAD, you could just do these magical changes to things without redoing anything. And we were all these claims and all this magic was built up around the technology, but at the time, the technology itself was not mature enough. There were also the fact that people were not really, they didn't understand the technology fully, so they set out this huge dissonance between what the expectation of the technology was and where the reality was at the moment. And this is where you go down into this downward slope in the curve, and you end up in this trough of disillusionment, where you had these great hopes of what you could do with this technology, but that magical idea was kind of now burst. And you sit there at the end thinking, oh, this is not at all, this technology is not going to do anything good for us. But then as time goes and you stick with it, an alignment kind of occurs between where the technology is at and also where you are meeting it with your own processes and how you are integrating it as a tool into your processes. And now, for the sake of some lovely graphical design on emotionality, we have a visual representation of this cart consisting of emojis, showing the journey that goes with kind of integrating any kind of technology. So we're using this to follow how technology has been integrated here in the studio, also with AI. So basically, we're starting here. Back in the early days of image generation, we had things like Google's Deep Dream, and later on we had DALL-E. that at the very beginning was giving these kind of hallucinatory imagery that was amazing to admire and look at. But at that time, there was little to no understanding that this would be something that would integrate later on as a tool into our design process. But at this point, we saw them merely as a novelty. But we still had interest, and we were still observing these. We have several people from our studio who were interested in these things before it kind of became apparent that this could be something as a tool for us. Fast forward some years, this was in the early 2023. Stable Diffusion had come out during that time. And we saw some potential in what this model was able to do. So here, this is from a workshop presentation that I had with our studio, also kind of showing my colleagues what, this is something we should take a look at. Here, there was the Stable Diffusion model that you could train on a single image of a person's face. And then you could input any type of image and have that face replaced by whoever you wanted to put there. So on the left here, you have Buba, one of our senior designers at the studio, depicted as Buba Jones on the right. And we realized, like, excuse me, with only this one image, we could go from a totally different lighting scheme and a totally different composition and apply it on these different images with quite good detail. And we had a lot of fun with this, of course, depicting all kinds of different characters as with our colleagues' faces on them. But all of us understanding and knowing photo editing software and things like this knew how much time it takes to get these kind of things like composition and lighting and correctly. So this is where we started to see, wow, there's actually some real potential in this technology, and maybe there's something that we could do with this. Here we also have photographs that is taken from our studio. And we really realized that we can also implement these composition guides, these control nets, to basically turn into a projection of what our studio maybe will look like when AI has taken all of our jobs. And through simple word prompting, we could transform this image into all kinds of different aesthetics and with all kinds of different contents and get quite an emotional and striking output. So we were going up here. So at this point, we were thinking, all right, AI is going to make our jobs easier. AI will make us earn more money. It'll give us all these new ideas, and it will give us so much more time to focus on just the things that we love doing. So we dedicated a full-time resource to it here at the studio, along with some of my own time, to start to explore all the different AI platforms that was available at the time. We did this exercise with very open expectations and with no stress or time limit attached to it, really. And so we went to go and have a look. And I don't have time to show you all of that now. I'm just going to show you some of the interesting highlights of what this climb of the ladder meant to us. So we learned, amongst many things, that we can use control nets to use these technical underlays with components and things that we usually start designing our ideation process on, to generate totally new designs. And obviously, there were a lot of flaws and non-feasibility topics with these designs, but we were still quite amazed by how we could, with simple wording, transform with the same composition and same basic component package the design of the product into something completely new. We also realized that we could, with image prompting, basically take design details and features from one image and transfer them to another, resulting in a completely new visual impact. So we were quite amazed by how realistic and attractive these images looked. We thought, it's a totally new, different. It succeeded its job in ideation of creating something totally new and different. But yeah, there was just no way that the design itself was feasible. It was recycling old, kind of out of context details, and there was just no coherency in the design logic. Another scenario here is when we were working with these kind of rough sketches of ours, these initial thumbnail ideas, in this case from a vacuum cleaner. And we could, from this rough sketch, go into a projection of a quite realistic photograph or rendering of what this product could look like down the line. And this was super fast. We skipped a lot of steps to get to this point. And it also had this attractive kind of magical essence to it. We were getting here a lot of detailed proposals that we weren't expecting, and that wasn't part of our initial idea, but still something that we thought were interesting and could take back into the iteration of our process. And one thing that's particularly interesting here is that our clients actually fell in love with these kind of images because they sold an emotional quality to them that apparently our design sketches, which we're working so hard on, did not. But here they could really be sold the idea of the product already in their home or on the way, they're clicking it home from the website or whatnot. But as the design still were not feasible and not functional and not matching cost target with too many parts and just, there's just so many things that don't make sense here. This was a bit of a tricky situation for us because we could not match or meet the clients in their love, or they said, yeah, we want this, but we said, yeah, but I'm sorry, you can't have this because it doesn't work. So this was something we had to also kind of experience a lot in the early days of using AI design in our process. Another topic was our 2D sketch process, where it takes a lot of time to do a sketch like this. So we thought, hey, why don't we train an AI on how we sketch and how we visualize things, and also on an actual visual brand language, in this case for one of our clients, Bosch. So if we train an AI on these things, we can get these more predictable results, and that actually accurately reenacts our sketch style. So this was quite great at the time. We had, we had everything looking like it was sketched by one of our designers. We had coherent application of the design principles for the brand, but there was still this kind of feasibility aspect lacking. So we have chainsaws with 3 handles, and there were things with the designs themselves that just didn't make a lot of sense. Also, we were experimenting with 2D to 3D application, which was quite an interesting step in evaluation and going into early 3D development, kind of as, again, a fast forward step. But still, we had to rebuild and retopologize all the data. So there was not really any super useful implementation of this either. So conclusions from our AI journey some months in was that it was all quite nice, but AI couldn't really design to the standards that we were needing. It did not have much notion of the feasibility or manufacturing aspects. And a lot of the time it produced these unexpected results. So in the end, we found that a lot of the time we actually need to spend more time with the generated content to correct things and make it feasible and work out the design. So we have the same kind of impacting vision, but with all the feasibility and works into it. So we thought in some cases we could have actually done it in the same amount of time if we just followed our traditional process. At this point, we were kind of down here. So we sat down and had a really rough look at our process. We dissected everything and looked how can we kind of change and move things around a little bit and look at it differently in a way where we can implement this technology with the technology where it's at. So we devised a strategy where we managed all of our expectations. We set out some objectives and we tried to define where AI can actually be useful in our process, compiling all the best of the various applications or AI applications that were available at the time, with the aim to create a process or tool that was available to all of our design staff to use. So we were evaluating a lot of different platforms and services for this. One of the important parts is the infrastructure behind this service. And, up until this point, all these instances were spread out all over, and only the AI experts really knew how to deal with these different steps of AI-powered design. And we wanted to unify all of this so that the tools were all available from this one toolbox. And yeah, this meant we had to build a lot of our own custom workflows. We had to learn how to program. Fortunately, today with the large language model tools that are available, even a designer can kind of side hustle as a programmer. So with some time and elbow grease, we eventually came out with our own app. Looks something like this, where we have all of the tools that are, let's say, adapted to the different needs in the different parts of our process. We also rigorously trained our neural networks to do things in a more expected way based on how what our needs were. So just showing you here some traditional design process steps of our own. So we usually start here with the 2D sketch, just a line drawing. We apply the color blocking to that, and then we add all these highlights and shadows, and we create this kind of 2D presentation ready sketch that includes all the feasibility and everything of the product. And this is all then the human intelligence process. And then we trained an AI exactly how this process is happening, and we could make it basically replicate what our designers were doing at the studio with quite good accuracy. So this is generated by our AI app. We actually found that it surpasses and even is better quality sometimes than designers at our studio. And further yet, we realized that we can go and push this even further. So we can go from this 2D presentation sketch into a 3D rendering. And we can even push it into a context, selling the whole. So we're already skipping here all the way into the market introduction step. Here we can see the same process with a stair climber. Not going to go too deep into it. So at this point, did we arrive here finally? So just looking into some interesting angles on how this is impacting on our process. So we had before all these kind of accelerators of AI within our process. But one thing that always remained was the client, our great opponent in the creative sector. So in the design development process, the client is, of course, present all the way from the first scribble that we make. And they always come with good, valuable insight, but there is also a lot of make the logo bigger and can we have it in that color action that happens here along the route. And in this process, really, we are experts. So already in the first step, we as designers know what the end result will be and what we're aiming for. So in it's actually better if we are left alone with all of this, client buy-ins, and can just go from this step. And that's the ideal world of the designer, right? I would just like to design and not have my client's wishes come to my table. But what we found now with this new AI tool, where we could go so fastly into this projection of realistic, and we had such good control and accuracy of the feasibility, is that we could actually already in the design ideation phase go into this, what would usually be the third client buy-in step or whatever, where they already understand and they find the product to be exactly what they want, which actually leaves us alone, and we don't have to spend as much time meeting and entertaining our clients' needs. So this has been a recent realization and development in our process, which we think is quite interesting, by the way. It has shaped our process. So just summarizing here, the AI app has enabled us to have a one-stop tool for all the AI applications that we've narrowed down to in our studio. We have a standardized sketched and rendering quality regardless of the designer's skill. So even an intern or a senior designer can provide the same level of quality of content. We have an acceleration of all the non-productive tasks in the design process. So things that are repetitive and just manual labor, and we can focus more on the skills that actually give value to the project, which is the creativity and the ideative thinking. And we can get this earlier client buy-in in the project, which just gives us more room to do so. So yeah, thank you, everybody. That's for me. If there's any specific questions or things you would like to go deeper in on these topics, you're always free to reach out to me as well. But yeah, I believe now we will open up for some, don't know how much time we will have, but we will open up for some questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Dante. Yes, there is a lot of questions, I would say. I think I just jump into it. And Niklas is asking, which AI models are currently key to add the last layer of realism to images and post-production? Example, I arranged all my assets, export it, and want the software to understand my context to only add correct lighting on top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we are using personally, I mean, that's a matter of choice how the tool works. Personally, we're using a model, two models. We're using one model from Black Forest Labs, which is called Context Pro. And we are also, the problem with that model is it's not very open source, so it's actually tricky to get to work well with our internal app. What we are using mainly with our app is Quen Image Edit, which is an image editing software. And both of these models have good ability of cohering with, basically, if you have an image or a context or something, to stick with that and then change and apply let's say, a filter or a style difference on top of it. But this is changing all the time. I think Nano Banana's recent update is also really good at these kind of things. So that's really, there's so many things to choose from. But the thing is to really understand your expectations and narrow down and collaborate with the AI about like what result you want and what you then need to provide. That's the main important thing, I would say.
Yes, so thank you, Dante. We have room for one more question. The time is running. And I think this is also for you, Dante, from Potomkino, that asks, do you train your own AI model? And if so, on what data and how much?
Good question.
Yes.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, yes, we do. It's been absolute key for us to get our AI tools to produce the results or the what we are targeting it to do. We are training it mainly on the content that we have ourselves. So that's our 2D sketch visualization style, also our rendering style. because these are the things that the AI doesn't really know yet. An AI usually knows what a nice photograph looks like or a promotional product shots, but they don't know how Tatic Designstudio sketches their sketch renderings. So we had to train it on the data set of our own sketches. To do this, in general, you need quite a lot of data, which we have, fortunately, because we've been around for long enough. But we have also devised methods in ways that we can multiply our data sets through AI. Basically, it's kind of a selection thing where we generate new sketches that look like our sketches, and then based on that output, we select the best and we input it again in another training round. So we get this kind of super charged and more, honing in on the exact result that we want. And that's how we work with training.
Thank you, Dante. And by that, there are more questions in the chat, but we need to close this webinar for today. Please contact us through the website if you have more questions, and if you want your questions to be answered by mail or whatever, we will be happy to assist. And also please sign up for our newsletter. The first one is going out next week, I think it is. And there you can also find this webinar to watch again if you want to. That was all from us for today. Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you so much, Dante. And I look forward to a continued dialogue with all of you that has been participating in this seminar. And I look forward to meet you all again. Thank you so much.